This week, we're going to be talking with Aaron Poffenberger, who has much to share about his firsthand experience in infiltrating Linux conferences with BSD awesomeness. BSD Now, episode 107, In Their Midst, recorded September 16th, 2015. Hey, I'm your host, Chris Moore.
And I'm Alan Jude.
We're glad to have you guys with us this week. We got an exciting episode. We're just back, fresh from BSD-Con. I know I rolled in last night, and Alan told us a little bit earlier about your adventures getting home. But definitely a good conference, a lot of fun, and thanks to the VeriSign guys for putting that conference on out in Virginia and Reston there.
And,
it was pretty fascinating.
Yeah, thanks to all the people that came over, and introduced themselves and said they were fans of the show and so on at the conference.
Yeah, it's always neat to see BSD Now listeners at the conference get to put a name with the face, especially when they're on IRC. And that's really cool. Yes. So we really enjoyed that. You did an awesome job on your talk, by the way, Alan. I thought that went really well.
Because I didn't think it was that good.
Oh, I thought it was really good.
No, a bunch of people commented about it specifically, and I was like, okay.
Yeah. So have we heard videos for any of these things where they were?
They were professionally recorded. They had like a couple of people doing it, and they did a very nice job. So I don't know when we would expect to see those, but being that they were professional, I wouldn't expect it to take very long. So hopefully by the I'd expect a couple of weeks, but not too many weeks.
Maybe while we're out of town and you're heading over to Euro and stuff. I know we have episodes of BSD Now, but it'd be nice if you had some other content to watch while we're gone, and then when we come back, we'll tell you all about those if they have turned up somewhere.
Yes, but one of the headline stories of VBSDCon was actually thanks to Groff and Dan Langeal. Dan is now the Groff keeper, as he will take Groff off to Sweden with us. And so he took Groff with him when he went to Starbucks in the morning to get coffee. And turns out the barista behind the counter was currently out of work sysadmin. And when he saw Groff and Groff's conference badge with the logos on it and so on, I was like, oh, I know about BSD. Is there something going on? And so Dan told him all about VBSDCon. And when his shift ended around lunchtime that day, he went home and got changed and came over to VBSDCon and registered at the door and actually wrote the BSD-A exam, the written exam, and joined the conference. And we had a great time hanging out with Paul. So I was glad that we could reach out to Paul and get him to the conference, even though I didn't know it was happening until it was already until breakfast of the first day of the conference.
Yeah, those are the neat kind of things that can only happen when you gather together and people start spreading out. And next thing you know, you're running into people like, oh, I know what you're doing. Like I recognize those logos or names or whatever. But yeah, it was cool to see him.
Groff is getting more people to the conferences. That's the whole point of Groff.
That's right. So yeah, it was a great conference. The Dev Summit, I think, was this the biggest one they've had at VBSDCon? Because it was pretty good size.
Bigger than last year's VBSDCon, or 2 years ago.
Yeah. It was definitely well done and very enjoyable. And it was neat to see there was quite a number of booths there as well for companies that are supporting BSD. So that was a lot of fun. I got to sit there and chat with a lot of guys about PCBSD and BSD Now and everything in between. So that was just good times.
It was great to get to meet so many of the people that were out there and got to talk to quite a few people for quite a bit about various different things. And the Dev Summit was also quite successful. Got to work on some code and get some things done.
Yeah, I was able to fix my laptop, so I'm not using the Visa driver anymore. How cool is
that?
On one of these new Broadwells. So the SCFB driver you can use if you go in pure UEFI mode, turn off the compatibility layer. It works. It's really nice.
You should write a tutorial about that.
Well, I plan on writing a blog post on the settings and switches and whatnot to make it all work, and I will put that up on the PCBSD blog sometime.
I need to do one about the Synaptic touchpad on my ThinkPad, because I managed to finally get it so tapping doesn't click. I know some people like that, but I hate that. My palms touch it when I'm typing, and I'm like, ah.
So for those who don't know what I'm talking about, it's one of these X1 carbons. So it's a Lenovo, but it's the really thin one. much lighter. It's replacing my T520, and of course, just got this one. It has Broadwell, and I was suffering with Visa, like many others, while we're waiting for drivers to get updated. But the SCFB driver I had never played with before, and there was some tricks to make it work. But once it works, it's still software driven, but it's a heck of a lot faster in Visa, and it's in the native 3K resolution of the laptop, which looks really nice. So I'm very pleased with it. It has gone from being annoying to a perfectly usable laptop now. I mean, I'm not playing any games on it at the moment, so that's perfect.
Yeah, and actually, the chat room just reminded me that we should probably show off the other thing that happened this morning. Yes, we got our BSD Now T-shirts.
Seen it? We got our shirts! Yay! So these showed up. I know mine showed up a couple hours before the show, and I think yours showed up
10 minutes before we were going to start recording.
Yeah. So it showed up right before.
My mailman got here just in time so that the doorbell wouldn't be in the show.
That was perfect. So it's awesome. Those BSD Now shirts are now out in the wild. So I hope you got yours because, that was a one-time run. So,
well, actually, Teespring will automatically re-engage the campaign if 30 people or 30 shirts get ordered.
Okay, so there you go. If you are jealous now and you got to see these awesome shirts that me and Alan are rocking today, you can go ahead and, what was the link for that again? BSD Now.
.tv/shirt.
We'll leave that up, I assume, so people can find that. But yeah, maybe you guys can get them to do another printing of that. That way you guys can get some awesomeness like we have. I know this is my new conference shirt.
Apparently, Drew found out about the shirt too late. And she was like, can I still get one? I'm like, well, I have a couple spare. I'll bring them to Sweden.
Yeah, I actually have one extra spare here too. So, well, you get her one, but we'll see. Maybe we'll have to autograph the extra one I have, and we can give it out at like BSD Can for the auction or something.
BSD.
Yeah, that would be cool. So anyway, great conference. Enjoyed meeting everyone. Looking forward to it again next time.
Very good food.
I know Alan's. Oh yes, the food was excellent there. The social event, excellent food. We went out and ate because I think it didn't start till like 8:00. So we went out and ate dinner with the family beforehand. And I was kicking myself afterwards, like, oh, we should just come down here.
Yeah, well, we asked because some year, I think the previous year, the social event was just like finger food, but this time it was serious food. There was like a whole make your own pasta bar. There was sushi, and there was this like half a cow.
Yeah, and they had good chocolate.
Oh yeah, so the desserts were really good. I don't know what that one thing we had, but it was like chocolate covered in miniature chocolate chips, and it was
little chocolate chips. Yeah, it was very good. So you guys, sometimes you just got to come to the conference for the food too, and this was one of those where it was excellent.
On top of the food, it was mostly about just getting to talk to everybody that was there, and I know at home that it's often hard to find people to talk about this BSD stuff, and that's why I love doing the podcast. I get to talk to Chris about this stuff every week. But outside of that, finding somebody whose eyes don't glaze over when I want to talk about, rewriting the
we get to scratch that BSD itch on a lot more frequent basis. I know a lot of you guys, you suffer in silence and you got to wait till the next Euro or the next BSD can or whatever, but that's why you got to come out to these. It's great, and everyone's all talking the same lingo, going, oh yeah, I ran into that problem, this is how we fixed it, or like I said, the video driver fix, that was fantastic. So it was Glenn Barber, by the way, who showed me that, 'cause he had a similar laptop with a Broadwell, and he's like, oh, change to this driver, it works fantastic. And the stuff I would have not figured out otherwise. So anyway, it was a great time to be had by all. So come out next time. Don't miss it if you get an opportunity to go to one. I think if you still have time, Euro, you could probably make it out to Sweden if you're local out there.
It's October 1st through 4th, basically.
That's right. And I think October 2nd and 3rd, I'll be at Ohio Linux Fest. So if you're in the Ohio area, that's in Columbus, I believe. So come on out. I'd love to sit at the booth and chat with you. We can talk some shop and BSD, and that'll be a lot of fun. So looking forward to it. Okay, we should probably get into some actual headlines today, though. We got a lot of news. So first up, we have Alexander Moten over at the FreeBSD project. He has committed some really cool new stuff for CTL high availability. Wow.
So this is for...
So tell us what this is going to do and change how it's going to change our lives.
This is for storage appliances. And basically, when you're doing high availability storage, your main problem is, if you have a big server with ZFS and a bunch of hard drives like I do, the problem is, if you have to reboot the OS for an upgrade, or if it crashes or whatever happens, what are you going to do? Your storage is offline until it's back up. Well, if you get something bigger, like some of the things that IX sells, what you actually have are two little like 1U head machines with sometimes like no hard drives, just CPU, RAM, etc. And then they connect to these sleds that are full of just hard drives. But if you have two of those heads, you can then, that way you can reboot one and get it up and then reboot the other or whatever. But the problem is that having both of them live at the same time can cause problems, right? Because this one will write to the hard drive and this one won't know that it had written to it, and they can clobber each other and all kinds of nastiness. So Alexander Moten had committed this high availability stuff, which basically allows those two machines to coordinate with each other, how they're accessing the disks, so they don't clobber each other. Nice. So, there was a design for this done up quite a while ago, but it was only ever just the design. There wasn't an implementation. And it kind of relied on some vaguely described hardware interface between the two machines for the coordination. But Alexander wrote just a special TCP protocol to go between the two, and that's the interlink that they use to coordinate with each other. And it allows them to run in one of 4 different modes in which both machines have access to all the hard drives, but without the risk of one of them, doing something it shouldn't and clobbering your file system. So the implementation has the 4 different modes. The first one is active unavailable, and that's when the interlink is down and only one of the machines has access to hard drives. In active standby, the first machine is running the hard drives like normal, and the second one only knows that the hard drives exist and synchronizing and stuff, but it doesn't actually use the hard drives. And then there's active mode, in which both nodes process commands and access the backing storage, and they synchronize with whichever one is the master over the interlink. Or there's active proxy mode, where the second node works just as a proxy, so any commands that you try to do to the disks on the second machine are sent over the TCP link to the first node, where it then does them to the disks. So depending on whether this is for failover or whether you're trying to load balance, you can kind of decide how you want to trade that off between active or active proxy. But this, it basically kind of solves one of the big problems of when we're looking at something like HAST for ZFS, except for instead of having the 2 nodes with the hard drives, you have one set of hard drives. But I'm definitely interested in looking at this.
This is definitely be cool stuff. It'll be in 11.
He also committed a bunch of updates to the documentation so that it describes how to use it. But he does note that the custom TCP protocol that he uses between the 2 nodes, it has no authentication. And so, it should only be used on a private internal interface and should never be exposed to on a public interface.
Sure.
Because it's just meant to be, possibly even actually a dedicated link and not even a LAN, just between those 2 machines so that they can coordinate.
Okay. Yeah, that's definitely cool stuff. So I imagine we'll see people trying that out, and hopefully we'll hear some usage reports here in the near future, how that works. Okay, well, next up we have, these Dragonfly BSD guys and their Xorg commits, but they just got some really cool new stuff this last week. So, it seems like weekly improvements being made. This week we have Amir Valdez, it looks like, has done some updates to the Xorg stack for Dragonfly, which now introduces panel self-refresh. So when I read that, I had to figure out, what is that? I had not heard of that term before. So we have a couple links to a few articles if you want to read through the gory details on it. But in a nutshell, it talks about how power savings can be achieved when you have static images on the screen. So for example, you have you're reading a document or your website or whatever, and your system's running at 60 frames a second. Well, when the image isn't actually changing on the screen, you don't need to have the CPU, GPU doing all the video processing and all the pipeline related to that to get that image to the screen running constantly, because the image hasn't changed. So they're able to use display memory actually on the monitor or on the screen or on your laptop, which is then used to hold the static image, which would be like your frame buffer, and then it can put that up on the screen until it changes, and then it needs to wake up the CPU and GPU and that whole pipeline to do its thing again. So pretty neat technology here, and if you read through these articles, you'll find out a little bit about some of the power savings possible with that, which does sound of interest, especially I know, for example, laptops are a big one. I think phones or mobile devices may also be interested in this as well. But it's neat to see that landed in Dragonfly. And, because they were in there, why not? They did some further Intel driver cleanup where they reduced the diff with Linux 3.17. So they're going to be getting these changes even faster. That's incredible.
Yeah,
you guys making me jealous.
I can definitely see, when I use my laptop, I got a fairly big screen, big chunk of that is just empty terminal where only every so often do I have the line long enough to go all the way to the edge of the screen. Or, I'm staring at the source code and there's a big chunk of just white screen that, why waste battery refreshing that?
Well, there's a lot of stuff on your screen that just isn't moving and is just static and sitting there and doesn't need to be constantly refreshed and whatnot. So that's pretty cool. So we need to see if that improves some battery life. I know one of the articles said, it may be a typical 40-minute to an hour extra battery life depending on your usage case. But hey, that's real savings. So that's some cool stuff. And of course, we'll love to see that crop up in some of the other BSDs as well. Yeah. Okay, what's this next one here? We have some new tool, it looks like, Alan?
Sluice, I think I'm pronouncing that correctly,
okay.
Is a new ZFS snapshot system. So it's a tool for managing your ZFS snapshots, and it works a little bit different than some of the other ones. It's written in Python, and it allows you to specify the format of how you want to set up snapshots, but stores the configuration as ZFS properties. So there are, the one I've been using, ZFS Tools, does that as well, but this one seems to have a little bit more flexibility. But it also includes some other tools like ZFS Copy, which runs the send-receive stuff, but in a much, you don't have to manage quite as much stuff. So you just say, hey, copy, this snapshot, and then it does like a ZFS schema URL over to this machine on this data set, and it does the copy, and there's a ZFS sync for, when you don't want to just copy one data set, but you want to kind of replicate it and keep it up to date. So ZFS sync works for that. There's also ZFS cull, which will go through and delete your expired snapshots. And and then there's something they're working on is ZFS import, which will deal with copying all your files off a non-ZFS file system onto ZFS and creating a snapshot of it. Which sounds like it might have been useful for Aaron or in the interview coming up.
Yeah.
But also ZFS export to take a clone of a ZFS snapshot and copy the files off to a non-ZFS file system as well.
Yeah, I can see that. That'd be handy.
So it's basically a nice little collection of tools for doing stuff with ZFS, and it looked quite interesting. So I thought I would highlight it. And just looking at the screenshots, it looks like it was developed on a Mac. Because I noticed in the localizations on a Mac, for the K for kilobytes is followed by the lowercase I. And then I also noticed that his setup is volumes with a capital V. And sticking capitals and things definitely sounds like a Mac to me. Right. But it looks like he's actually replicating his backups to a Mac. Or maybe the other way around. But sounds... Anyway, it looks like a good tool. And if you're interested in that, it looks quite nice.
Somebody put that in the various porch trees because that can be really helpful. So thank you also, Dan, for telling us about that project. That is very helpful. So next up, we have WhatsApp. So how is it that they only need 50 engineers for 900 million users?
Because FreeBSD.
And this is, right? This over at Wired.com. We have a neat article about that.
It is always nice when mainstream press is talking about FreeBSD as well.
That's right. So the article does indeed mention that FreeBSD is what they're using under the hood, and then they also spend a bit of the discussion talking about some of the programming languages involved. In particular, how WhatsApp uses Erlang and is using its scalable concurrency and allowing the deployment of new code to running processes, how that allows them to rapidly make changes and update things. And that's pretty slick stuff. But any big takeaways out here?
They also mentioned Haskell, but also mentioning that Erlang was originally written in the 80s by engineers at Ericsson, which is a big Swedish telecom. Specifically for building telephone systems. And since WhatsApp is actually kind of replacing SMS messages on cell phones, it turned out to be the right tool for the job. But the biggest thing is with the way their app works, they have to keep millions of TCP sockets open at once. And it turns out FreeBSD's network stack did a lot better job than other operating systems at doing that. And so it's great to see them, telling us a little bit about it because, we'd heard one or two little blog articles a couple of years ago, but we hadn't heard much since they got bought by Facebook. But it's still FreeBSD and it's still going strong.
Yeah, so I guess Facebook Messenger uses Haskell to accomplish kind of the same thing. And then the article also talks about Google and Mozilla are trying to build some of that same level of flexibility using Go and
Hmm.
Rust. So we'll keep an eye on that and see what those turn into. Maybe the next big product will be written on one of these. And what was the YouTube link you had here also? Is that just the related
Yes,
video?
they gave a talk at a conference about it. They were the keynote,
Okay,
so I stuck a video of that in there here as well.
great. Okay, well, if you'd like to watch the video instead of reading the actual written article, we have the link for that in the show notes as well. So thank you, Ed, for submitting this
Hmm.
news item. So before we go to our interview today, which you guys will enjoy, we of course want to mention our first sponsor this week, which is going to be DigitalOcean. And of course, the website for that, digitalocean.com. It doesn't get any easier than that, where you can go and use the code FreeBSD Now, which will allow you to create a DigitalOcean droplet, and it gives you a $10 credit
Hmm.
for it. So you can basically get 2 months free if you're running their lowest tier
Yep.
model, and that's still backed by SSDs, which is just a great way to go if you're going to be spinning up a VM. And of course, you can put FreeBSD or OpenBSD in that
Yeah, whichever
droplet.
you prefer.
And if you hate yourself, they do have Linux as well. I
Yep.
mean, that is an option they offer since enough people beg for it. But FreeBSD is definitely the way to go on
Yep.
that one. But if you talk to those guys, of course, let them know you heard it here on BSD Now. But they offer all kinds of great stuff, and will make it super simple. I know I saw somebody chat say it takes like 34 seconds to boot up their
Hmm.
droplet to create it and boot it. So come on, 34 seconds, that
Yeah,
is good.
can't beat
And of
that.
course, yeah, you can't beat that. You can do it all programmatically. They have an API as well. So if you need to, tear these up, create and tear them down, create them, etc., you can do that on the fly as well. Very simple. But go check them out, guys. DigitalOcean.com. That'd be a good weekend project if you need to spin something up in the cloud and want to use FreeBSD or OpenBSD to do it. A great way to go about that. We're joined now by Aaron Poffenberger, who's joining us. I met you in Texas a couple weeks back, Aaron, at Texas Linux Fest. So it was great to meet you in person. I'm glad we're able to get you on the show today. So first of all, thanks for coming on, taking the time. We appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Great. So we're going to be talking a little bit about presenting BSD at Linux conferences. So before we get into that, we've not had you on the show before. So go ahead and tell us a little bit about yourself first, and how did you first get involved with BSD?
Sure. So my name is Aaron Poffenberger. I'm a software developer in Houston. So getting over the Texas Linux Fest was pretty easy for me, a couple-hour drive.
Mm-hmm.
As far as getting to BSD, I don't know if I took the most circuitous route, but I certainly took a very long route to getting to BSD. Like probably a lot of us growing up, I had access. I got my first access to computers in school, but talking like Apple IIs and TRS-80s and things like that. So no BSD there. Had to brush up with Xenix though. This was a friend of mine was working at a computer shop and they had Xenix, but it really wasn't until about 95, 96. Some friends of mine started an ISP, which may sound like a familiar story to you, and they decided to use Slackware. But what was interesting is we were sharing the T1 with another ISP, and they were all FreeBSD guys. And so you had one T1 split at some point, and so we got half the bandwidth, they had half the bandwidth. We were the Slackware side, and they were the FreeBSD side. So didn't really get to play with it much. So my first real brush with FreeBSD was I was working at a software company called PentaSafe here in Houston, and our chief scientist was a guy by the name of Rich Murphy. If you go check the core list on the FreeBSD website, Rich is on there. He used to be on the core of FreeBSD, and he's the one who started talking to me about it. Showing me the Walnut Creek CDs and telling me. Matter of fact, I think Rich told me he was on the X11 porting team. But even still, I was still mostly working with Linux because the company I was working for, we didn't. I was actually on the Windows team, so I was developing by day on Windows, had Linux at home. So it's really until about 2002, 2003 when OpenBSD 3.3 comes out. So I'm kind of a late comer to this, given how long I've been working with computers. But what pulled me into the OpenBSD was how easy it was to install, which was, to me, was kind of a revelation. Is when people would talk about the BSDs, you always talk about FreeBSD being kind of the more friendly version, OpenBSD, the secure version, but that was not my impression at all about how hard it was. It took me 10 minutes. To this day, it takes me 10 minutes to install OpenBSD.
Mm-hmm.
I can have a box up and running in no time. Matter of fact, I probably spent more time studying the FAQ, learning how they tend to partition the disks than any other part of the OpenBSD install. The other thing that got me to OpenBSD at that time was I wanted binary packages. I'd been running Gentoo for about a year or two on a box at home, and if you've ever done the emerge world thing, it's painful. Matter of fact, after a while, what you'll find is your Linux box, your Gentoo Linux box, at least at this time, looks like no other Gentoo Linux box on the face of the earth, because you've been doing all this custom install stuff. And that's probably what pushed me a little bit away from free as well, because I knew at the time to install ports, it was mostly make, install kind of thing. I wanted binary packages. So OpenBSD kind of fit the bill for me, and I've been using OpenBSD since about 3.3 now.
Cool.
Okay.
So as Chris alluded to, you'd previously just presented at Texas Linux Fest on both FreeBSD and then on FreeNAS. So what specifically prompted you to do that?
Well, I'm going to have to give you all some of the credit. I've been listening to BSD Now for a while, and it's kind of a common refrain, especially as you all head off to shows. You talk about, maybe go to your local Linux Fest. And last year I started thinking about it a bit. I was thinking, well, I've done a lot with Linux. I've done a lot with BSD. So, probably would make sense to maybe do a talk about BSD. So one of the talks was on kind of a BSD for Linux users topic. Let's talk about, as a Linux user, what is BSD like? What are some of the key differences? What are some of the key technologies that you'll find on BSD that you might not find on Linux? So I really wanted to give, in an hour, a nutshell presentation of what is BSD and why you should find it interesting. Now, FreeNAS, though, that came from just my own personal experience with it. I had built a FreeNAS server. For years, I've been wanting a snapshotting file system. When ZFS first came out, I read about it in the trade magazines, and this thing sounded awesome. There was a preempted port to try and put it on Mac OS. As we all know, that didn't go anywhere for a while, though it's come back. And so what was happening was I was filling up hard disks with backups. So I'd have a dump minus 0, and I'd do a couple of differentials, and then I'd forget kind of where I was at. And I was like, well, I don't want to throw these away, and I don't want to go through all these files. So I just started collecting disks. I've got all these disks lying around the house, and then seeing how far FreeNAS had come, and seeing that ZFS was a real serious option, I said, okay, that's it. I'm going to build a box. I'm going to unpack every single one of these dump files and just snapshot them. So unpack a dump, snapshot. Unpack all the diffs, snapshot. And so over time, I just built up a nice little ZFS server. It's still not quite as easy as I would like in terms that there are still some files that are packed kind of deeply in tars and whatnot, but at least now I have a way of getting at this data, and I can safely pull it out. So I want to talk to users and just in general, because I think we're all running up against this storage problem. And whether it's at home or whether it's at the office, we're all kind of saying, what do I do with all this crazy data? And FreeNAS is a very credible solution for that. So those were the two talks that I put in the CFP, and they picked them up.
Nice. Well, it kind of speaks to two different things there. The first one is, as most of us has learned, it's cheaper to buy more hard drives than to spend the time to figure out which data you can safely delete.
Right, exactly. And a snapshotting file system really alleviates some of that. Now, of course, now I've got terabytes of files that I've got to go through and kind of clean up. But at least now I'm not worried, well, what if that, and most of my disks were in mirror sets. So I'd actually have 2 disks sitting on a shelf or sitting in a server. But now I've been able to put all those to use. I took all those disks, actually built 2 FreeNAS servers. I built a small one where I copied everything to, and then I built the big one out of all the disks that I had and was able to copy everything back. So I now have 2 FreeNAS servers sitting in the house.
Yeah, and obviously the other one was that what's really interesting about FreeNAS is that there are more Windows users of FreeNAS than there are BSD users of it, and probably actually more Linux users of FreeNAS than there are even of BSD users of it. And it's
probably
it's easy enough and separate enough it can sneak into those environments that are Windows or Linux only, and slowly convince them of the right way to do things.
Right. And FreeNAS has the selling point that if you want ZFS, if you want to put it in a Linux environment, it's doable. I've done it here at my office. We're running a Ubuntu 14.04 install. I went through all the steps, read all the how-tos, and got it installed. I actually have snapshotting boots, just like you would have in PCBSD, but it's not trivial. And as far as I know, there is no installer that's going to make it for you.
Mm-hmm. And then the other one was obviously with ZFS's transparent compression, most of the advantage of putting things in tar files goes away.
Right. That's what I told the people here. I said, as you pull files over, don't compress them. Just let the file system do its work for you.
That's right. Make it easier for yourself.
Yeah.
So when you do go to a Linux conference and present, what would you say are some of the main selling points when you're presenting BSD to a predominantly Linux user crowd of, say, Linux admins or just home users?
Right. Yeah. So that's an interesting one. Back in the late '90s and 2000s, I read all the magazines. I'd be reading, PC World or whatever, and you'd always see these shootouts, right? FreeBSD did this many operations per second on with Apache, and now Linux has moved to the fore. But I really do think ZFS, jails are particularly interesting. The Linux world with Docker has gotten very interested in process isolation. Hypervisors are great and they're wonderful when you need to run a different OS, but if all you're trying to do is isolate processes from one another, a hypervisor is even itself it adds a little bit of overhead, and you can eliminate that. So when you start talking about jails, and you can say, oh, by the way, jails have been around since what, like 97, 98, very mature technology. And this was designed exactly for the situation that we want to address, which is, if I remember the story right, you had an ISP that was wanting to isolate users and give them the equivalent of their own FreeBSD box, but didn't want to have to build up a bunch of hardware. And of course, there's really no hypervisors at this time. VMware, I think, comes out around that time, but you're not going to run that in your data center.
Especially without the hardware virtualization, it was just never going to be fast enough.
Right. The closest you could get is you could dedicate a hard disk to VMware. I actually played with that, but yeah, without the hardware virtualization, you're really hurting. So when you can talk about FreeNAS, when you can talk about jails, when it comes to OpenBSD, I like to talk a lot about the things that are going on and show the various technologies. Talking about PF, talking about CARP, talking about I think everybody at this point understands where SSH for the most part comes from. But we can talk about all these other technologies. SPAMD with BGP, some things that people don't realize are out there. And so you can say, look, Mr. and Mrs. Linux admin, here's some technology that you can drop into your data center today, and it works. And then the other thing we've got going for us is we've got some really incredible stories that we can talk about. And you can say, when someone says, well, how performant is it? Well, you can start talking about Netflix. Okay, you want to talk about data pumping? Let's talk about what Netflix is doing. From their data center into, say, Comcast's perimeter, and then from there to the users. So we've got some real interesting scalability answers for people.
Yeah. So on the flip side of this, what are areas you think where we could improve BSD to present better to Linux users?
And that's a tough one. One of the ones that I've been struggling with is friends will ask me all the time, well, I want to run BSD on my MacBook. As a matter of fact, I think last week you all had a question from somebody asking that exact question. How do I get BSD? I have not had the experience that your person who wrote in was talking about. I can get BSD to run on my MacBook, but that Broadcom chipset is just killing me. So what are you going to use? You're going to use a little dongle. The dongles have they really don't have a decent antenna in them. With a proper laptop, you've got an antenna going around usually the frame of the screen, so you get really nice connectivity. So when people ask, well, how can I take that technology and move it in? That can be a little bit of a problem. But there are some other areas. One of the problems is, and I'm not sure we can fix this, there's just some differences. There's Linux-isms and there's BSD-isms, right? There's just, so convincing people that the retraining isn't going to be as hard. So maybe talking about how hard or easy it is to drop a BSD box in, and how long did it take for the current Linux admins to be able to get up to speed. It's not as hard as people think. The init stuff can be a little bit different, especially as systemd takes over. We're going to see some more divergence there in how we deal with that. I do think the desktop we have a great answer for. PCBSD is great. I run OpenBSD on a desktop and it works great. So, so we've got those benefits, but I think ignorance is what we're fighting against most. It's just talking to people, making them realize BSD is out there and it's everywhere.
Yeah, it's kind of like the Groupon article from the FreeBSD Journal the other day. Is you got to get people past the being afraid of the change and get to the next point, which is being excited about the change.
Right. And thinking about it from a different perspective, I love using the example of VeriSign. All through the 90s and the early 2000s, we started talking about the monoculture. Well, guess what? We've got a new monoculture. It's just not necessarily a Windows monoculture; it's a Linux monoculture. So being able to talk about VeriSign, for example, and their decision to specifically try and separate out. Although we are seeing some other interesting monocultures. With OpenSSL, we found, much to our surprise, that everybody and their dog is using this exact same library, and it's got vulnerabilities. Sure, there's GNU TLS out there, but for the most part, everybody was on OpenSSL. But talking about the change and convincing people it's not as hard as they think.
Yep.
So, I assume, first of all, you're not a committer for either project? Or?
No.
Okay. So that actually works really good at this next question. So what would you specifically recommend to other BSD users or fans who also aren't committers, who maybe want to go help and present or teach about BSD at their local Linux conferences where they don't have to fly halfway across the world and can do that? And are there any things they should specifically avoid that maybe you've learned doing this?
Yeah. So there's tons we can do. Within my group of friends, I'm kind of known as the BSD guy. So trying to get a little bit familiar, even though I use OpenBSD and that's my preferred operating system, I know enough about free that if someone asks me a question, that I can usually answer it. When it starts getting out in the weeds and you ask me a little bit about Net or Dragonfly, my knowledge falls off. But so being knowledgeable about the other BSDs, be able to answer some of those simple questions. In fact, whether you want to get BSD certified or not, I'd recommend getting the study disk from the BSD certification group, because it's kind of a self-contained little, here's how to do, here's the various versions, play with these. So one, I'd get a little bit more knowledgeable. Two, be willing to talk. Three, go out there and see, look at some of the other presentations people are making. My slides are up on my GitHub account, so anybody can look at them. I put mine under I think a CC by 1, whatever the most open other than CC by 0. So basically, you can take my slides, do anything you want to with them, and use them. Some things I would definitely recommend against is don't go in there with a chip on your shoulder. That this is one of the things I think BSD's kind of felt a little bit in the 90s and the 2000s was this. Well, Linux, we were all busy with this lawsuit over here, and we kind of lost some of the momentum. And IBM and all these companies put their money into Linux. Well, okay, that's water under the bridge. And there are some things that the BSDs, I think, do extremely well. I think we're much more engineering oriented. But does that mean you need to go to a conference and start slinging stones and throwing mud at Linux, or jumping on the systemd hate wagon? So being careful of that, respecting the fact that these people are professionals in their field. And there are good, solid technical reasons for choosing Linux, period. And so if a person needs to use Linux to accomplish their job, respect that. But then suggest, okay, look, here's some things you can do with BSD where it's a drop-in replacement. So I would be very careful about how I present, how I talk about Linux. But there's nothing that says you can't have a few jokes in there. So one of my slides, when I was talking about why would you want to switch to BSD, the very last bullet point was you hate systemd. But I had a little smiley face in there to let them know that I understand that this is a raging issue in your community right now. So just kind of a wink and a nod at that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think it's important to kind of present it as, here's this really interesting thing that you might not know about, and
right.
build excitement about it, rather than saying, the thing you're using is crap, you should use this. Kind of, right. It's important to not just present the information, but also subtly explain why they should take a look at it.
Right. And, again, Linux is, it's very scalable. People are using it for incredible things out there. So we can't just say, oh, you made a bad choice, because they probably didn't. But again, ZFS, I think, is one of our key selling points. You're just not going, at least as far as I can tell, because of licensing issues, I don't know that you'll ever see a really good installer that's going to set things up the way Free or PC can. Mm-hmm. Actually, the other thing we kind of forget about is there's actually another journaling file system in the BSD world. Dragonfly's got Hammer, and Hammer 2's coming along, and so we can talk about. The other thing I was going to mention is when you're making your presentation, try and talk about the things that you have direct experience with. Yeah. So as an example, I can talk about ZFS and FreeNAS as a home user, and I can make a very credible presentation. I can talk about using it in our data center here at my office. Alan, on the other hand, can talk about huge installs, talking about send and receive across vast distances. So I'd recommend, is there some way that you've deployed BSD in a really unique way where it solved a problem? Those are the things people want to hear about and be able to say, wow, that's cool. I didn't know I could do the same thing.
Yeah. So often when you're writing a presentation, it's helpful to know kind of what depth of knowledge the audience is already going to have. So how much have you found that the average the average attendee of one of these Linux conferences actually knows about BSD?
It varies, but it's mostly not enough. That's what you'll see when I'm doing the presentation. You'll see a few heads doing this, and you can say, okay, well, there's a BSD user, or that person's had some experience with BSD. But I find a lot of people come up and ask incredibly questions that are, I don't want to say naive, but you're going, wow, really? You didn't know we have GNOME? We have KDE, we have all of these same things. And so you'll find questions that simple. What are you using for desktop? Or, can I have my KDE? And yes, of course you can. What you're not going to find are, one of the things I hate having to tell is that we don't have CUDA support as well as Linux has it. But so I find a lot of very simple questions. So I would recommend, if you're going to do a talk, talk a little bit about the history. I didn't talk a whole lot, but I did mention, it starts back in the 70s. You've got Dennis Ritchie, you've got Bill Joy, and talk a little bit, maybe in 5 minutes, where does BSD come from? A lot of people don't even know that. Many of them don't even know what BSD stands for. So it can be that simple that you have to start with.
Yeah, and I found quite interesting at Linux Fest Northwest, quite a few people weren't aware that FreeBSD has binary packages and has had them for about 2+ years now. But that's a fairly recent development, and if you had only heard about BSD in the past, then you didn't know that was there now.
Although, in probably all honesty, there may be some BSD users who don't know that Free has binary packages, because you always thought of Free as the make install guys. Yeah, you're right. They don't know that. And with OpenBSD, I'm not even sure some of them recognize that not only can you use it as a desktop, but that's how the developers, for the most part, run Open. As far as I know, the vast majority of them don't run it in VMs. They're actually struggling with the hardware and making it work on whatever. So I would not walk into a conference, although now there are some exceptions. I think George Neville Neal did a pretty high-level talk at NYC Bug, where he got into some of the real meat and was comparing internals a little bit.
That was NYC Lug, the Linux one, yeah.
Oh, is it the Lug? Okay, yeah, you're right. That makes more sense.
It was FreeBSD is not a distro.
Right. But so if you knew you had a group like that, and where you've got some hardcore developers who say, for example, understand sockets and understand how virtual file systems work, then by all means dig into that meat. But at a general conference, I would expect that they're interested, they're curious, but not very knowledgeable.
Mm-hmm. So I guess since you've now done this before, are you basically writing your own material for this, or are you borrowing from other talks? And I know you kind of mentioned you've released your slides and material under a license. I think, which license was that again?
It's whatever the Creative Commons.
Okay.
It's almost the lowest one.
So do you think there's a place for maybe having some more collaboration like this for other folks who want to go to Linux conferences and give talks on BSD? That way we don't have to all reinvent the wheel and make a lot of the same slides over and over again.
Sure. So in the first place, I usually do write my own stuff. It's mostly when I'm preparing a presentation of any kind, I don't sit down and start writing. What I usually do is go over the talk mentally for weeks in advance, kind of working out how I think I'm going to start the talk, and thinking about who the audience is, what kind of going back to Alan's past question. What do I think their level is, and so how am I going to present that? How much time do I have to talk? Because that, of course, that's a key thing that's going to drive the talk. So I write most of my own material, but the further I go away from, say, OpenBSD, the more likely I am to start, doing research. But I do borrow. So, for example, since I listen to BSD Now on my commute to and from the house, little nuggets are getting stuck in the back of my head, and I'm thinking to myself, I can use that. So, as a matter of fact, when I was driving to Texas Linux Fest, that happened to be the week you released the Brian Cantrell talk, which was, of course, epic in and of in its own right. But he filled in some little details that I didn't know. On the fly, I added some things. While I was there, I met a guy by the name of Raman who had worked at Sun, and he told me some things that I didn't know about ZFS and Apple. Met another guy by the name of Justin Cormack, and he was filling me in on. He's the first NetBSD user I think I've met in the flesh, which is kind of sad, but I don't meet very many OpenBSD users for that matter either. But he filled me in on some details about run kernels, for example, in the NetBSD.
We got to interview him a little bit about that at Euro last year.
Oh, great. So mostly I write my own, but I do think there is some room for borrowing, whether we need a common repository or whether we just need to make sure we link to one another's slide decks on our, whether it's our blogs or whether it's using Twitter or in our own repository, saying, okay, hey, I found some good material here. Use this. And one thing I would love to see, though, is surprisingly, I was having a hard time finding logos that I liked. I would have liked to have had a lot more logos, finding them in the right sizes and whatnot, but that may have just been me failing at Google Foo. So,
Google Images.
Yeah. But definitely borrow, and I would encourage everybody to release their slides under as free a license as you possibly can. The other thing I did was anything that I embedded in my slides, the very last slide deck is a list of things that and their licenses. So, for example, I used a logo from FreeNAS in the FreeNAS talk, and so at the end I had I don't remember if it was a link or something, but I just basically said, this particular logo is not copyright to me. So if you're going to reuse it, make sure that you're allowed to do that. And I think the FreeNAS project isn't going to give anybody any grief about using the logo, but yeah, definitely sharing, borrowing. And giving one another credit, talking about, I did that in the talk. I mentioned, BSD Now a little bit. I mentioned places where you could either get more information. I had, I think, 4 pages of just URLs at the end of where you could get more information. So I would definitely encourage people to share that. And if someone wants to set up a common repo, I'd be more happy to contribute, but I think those things fall apart after a while.
Well, I think it's important, too, that if you're going to do one of these, you have to focus on the areas you know. So a repository like that would likely consist of pieces that you could stitch together into your own presentation, rather than here's an entire slide deck, just go present this.
Yeah. So in the Emacs world, there's the Emacs wiki. So if you're an Emacs user, they've got this huge wiki, and that's actually been fairly successful. But I do think that there's one person who kind of who started it and sees himself as the curator. of this wiki. So a wiki might work, but the problem with wikis is they go stale after a while unless someone makes that commitment to keep it up to date.
So next question, since you're primarily an OpenBSD user, have you thought of doing more talks related to OpenBSD? And is OpenBSD something that's on the radar of the typical Linux user?
Yeah, that's well. First off, everybody's heard of OpenBSD. I don't think, other than people who are just outside the field altogether, I don't think I've ever really run into a Linux person who doesn't know what OpenBSD is. They may have some misconceptions, or they may not really know much about the project, but they've heard about it and they are curious. Matter of fact, when people find out that I use OpenBSD, they start asking questions. Well, how does it work? And inevitably, there's a question about Theo, Linux people, because if they read /dot, there's always something about that. And I just tell them, say, look, go, join the miscellaneous list or tech. It's more hyperbole coming from just other people. So I do think there is interest, and I would like to do some talks, but I haven't written any yet. So I'd like to start working on that. Maybe talk about how to use OpenBSD for spam is one of the key things we tend to think about, or doing PF with carp, doing that failover. Those are the kinds of things I think would actually be better as workshops. And at least Texas Linux Fest didn't have any workshop options, but I would have loved to have done a workshop on, okay, bring your laptop, bring a couple of NICs, some USB NICs, and let's set up and do a little bit of PF and carp, failover, or teach them how to use spamd with BGP.
Well, that's something maybe it's early enough we can get them to put something like that on the schedule for next year. That would be fun.
Also, just if you're willing to come out to a BSD conference, both of those would actually be well attended as our tutorials on the 2 days before most of our conferences, actually.
Yeah, I was looking at the BSD CAN one. There was a couple of really great ones. So yeah, maybe I'll submit that. I was talking with Chris at Texas Linux Fest. Got some ideas of some things I might try and submit for Asia BSD. See if I can maybe pick up a speaking opportunity there.
But I think actually applying things like carp and PF sync and so on are definitely things that people will be interested in, even as people that already know BSD.
Right.
Great. Well, we're going to go ahead and wrap up. Is there anything else you want to mention here before we go?
Well, one of the things, I think most of the speakers, or most people y'all interview say this, but I'm going to add my 2 cents on this as well. Support your, whatever your foundation is, whether it's the OpenBSD Foundation, the FreeBSD Foundation, NetBSD. Buy the T-shirts, buy the CDs and whatnot, because all of this goes to help the projects. I think you all talked about this a couple of weeks ago. Mike Larkin talking about his new hypervisor. This is being funded by the OpenBSD Foundation. And so that's being funded entirely by, sure, we've got the big money that came in. Microsoft put some money in the foundation, but your $10 a month PayPal helps pay for. I'm totally excited about the fact that OpenBSD is going to have its own hypervisor. That to me, if you ever tried running anything under QEMU, it hurts.
Yeah, everyone's been there once. It's no fun.
Right. And who knows? Maybe the foundation, once Hammer FS gets further along, or Hammer 2, that is, we've got the Google Summer of Code project bringing it over. So, this money has a very direct impact on the projects, and actually gets us the kind of things that we want to see in our particular flavor. Yeah. So definitely support it.
And I think that's the FreeBSD Foundation, especially being an American nonprofit. Just having the number of unique people that have donated actually has quite an impact for them, not just on keeping their tax-free status and so on, but for other companies that are looking at it and be like, oh, look, there's this huge list of people that also think this is important. Even if a lot of those names are only on the list under, made a $5 donation, it's definitely worth it. And so, plus, if you go to a BSD conference and you donate, you get a little number written on a sticker on your badge and you win something.
That's right.
Yep. Somebody at VBSDCon won a really nice Netgate PF Sync box. It's got like 6 NICs and beefy Atom CPU, and it was really nice.
then one other thing I'd mention is, get involved in the projects in some way, even if it's, to the OpenBSD guys in particular, if you're not installing current, I'll tell you, it's nowhere near as painful as you think it is. On my production servers, I usually run stable, and definite kudos to the M-tier guys for making stable binary updates available. So I want to mention that, but those D messages are helpful. But then lastly, kind of a kudos to you and Alan, and I know TJ left the project, but kudos to you all for this project. I love being able to tell people during the talk, if you want to know more about BSD and you want your weekly fix, listen to those things help. It's amazing how much how much interest you can get when people can listen to a podcast on their commute.
Well, I for one got to throw my 2 cents in here. Seeing you do this at Texas Linux Fest, it would be really cool to see this at more conferences. So I know Drew goes to a ton of these Linux conferences. I go to a fair number of them, and it's really neat to see other BSD community folks and maybe people like yourself without even a commit bit who get up and give these talks and present it. And I think it lends itself to the viability of the projects. Like, oh wow, there's people coming out of the woodwork now giving talks about this. This is really cool. Maybe I should check this out, as opposed to another IX employee talking about it, or a FreeBSD core committer or something. So kudos for what you do, Aaron, and I hope that inspires a bunch of other folks to take what you've done and kind of do that at their local group too. It's only a couple days out of the year usually for a conference like this. So.
Yeah. Nice. Steal the slides, use them.
That's right. That's right. Put it to good use. It's all open. So.
Thank you very much.
Well, yeah, thank you so much for coming on the show with us this week, Aaron. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Okay, and we're back from the interview. Hope you guys enjoyed that. Aaron was a lot of fun to talk to. I enjoyed meeting him at Texas Linux Fest. So if you're in the Texas area next year, you need to come, and I'm sure Aaron will be there, and several of us from IX will be as well. And who knows, maybe you can come this year.
And also, if you happen to be going to any of your local Linux conferences, write in and let us know, and we'll tell other people that watch the show, and maybe we can have a little brigade of BSD people going to each local conference.
I think that would be a fantastic
I can see some
thing.
people, if you weren't giving a talk, you might be like, well, I don't really want to go to this Linux thing alone, but if I know there's going to be a bunch of other BSD people there, then sure, I'll go.
Come hang out at the booth for a few hours, do your stint, talk to some people. It's just good to get that FaceTime with other folks who want to talk about BSD. Okay, so first up in the news, speaking of BSD.
And speaking of having a booth at every Linux conference.
Right. So we have first up, Ghost BSD has done a new release.
Do the IX ad. I was like segueing into it for you and everything.
See, I completely screwed that up. Well, I guess we need to mention IX Systems then. That's right. It is time for that. So speaking of having a booth at every conference, who sends me to all these conferences is, of course, going to be IX Systems. And that's going to be ixsystems.com/BSD Now, of course. You guys probably know that by now, but maybe this is your first episode or something. We'll give you a pass, and that's your one notice. But anyway, go to ixsystems.com/BSD Now and go talk to those guys. If you have some project or something you need, a new server, the FreeNAS Mini, which you can buy on Amazon.
Yes, the amount of people that were like, I can buy that on Amazon?
Yeah.
I can prime that?
Yes, yeah, a lot of people did not know that, but yes, you can prime that FreeNAS Mini, and all you got to supply is the hard drives.
Well, they have a version with hard drives as well, I think, on Amazon.
Yes. But yeah, definitely that's one way you can get a hold of those, which my little one, it's the previous generation. It's still sitting there humming. I've never really had a problem with it.
That's the whole point of it. The newer FreeNAS Minis is a high-end CPU that can do virtualization and stuff, but is still low power, only 17 watts. And you get ECC RAM and all the reliability you need in a nice little box that, is perfectly fine to have under somebody's desk at the office or at home, and it's not going to make a lot of noise. And you get all the stuff you want for ZFS with less hassle.
That's right. The nice interface on top of it. So, of course, IX Systems makes those, but say that's too small for your taste. Yeah. You need something, 80 cores. You need
an entire rack full of hard drives with this dual-headed setup that we were just talking about.
Or you have something where it's like, I need to see how much RAM I can shove in this box because we need a lot of memory. Guess what? They do crazy stuff like that.
6 terabytes of RAM, easy.
Yeah, is that enough? Right? No problem. They've done that before. So how many companies will say, yeah, we do those? So, Anyway, IX systems can do all that. So get in touch with them, explain to them what the problem it is you're trying to solve, first of all, because a lot of times they may have good suggestions based on that. Like, oh, you want to invest your money more in this type of SSD or not in this type of SSD. You need more RAM, etc. So they've done all these things. So often their sales engineers will know exactly what that is you're trying to do, and we'll just walk you through what they've seen provide the best results, more bang for your buck, so to speak. So get in touch with the guys at IX Systems. And if you get some cool new hardware tech pictures, send it to us. We like to see them. It's always fun to show that off.
Yes.
Okay, well, now we'll get back into the news, right? So, since I botched that earlier. But anyway, speaking of a BSD, one we haven't talked about in a while, but Ghost BSD has given us a new release. 10.1 has just dropped. And it looks like this time they have also included the XFCE desktop as an alternative to the Mate desktop, which they had previously. In addition, it looks like their installer's been updated, so now they can boot using Grub. The BSD loader, or just no bootloader at all if you're going to set it up with your pre-existing Linux Grub, for example. In addition, it looks like they are including the new Octo package manager, which is pretty cool. And that's a Qt-driven front end to package NG, which is pretty slick. And I know I put that in the ports tree, and I'm glad to see that that's doing well. It's a great little package manager. Like it. So yeah, definitely go check that out. And I guess, of course, being 10.1, I'm sure it's based on FreeBSD 10.1, or did I get that wrong?
And they have a station update manager to update the FreeBSD base system and your third-party software. But interestingly, they've come up with a system so that you can install package or software from packages or ports on the live DVD USB session. So, when you put the live CD, it's like, well, I need this package. It's not installed. But normally, it's mostly read-only environment. But they've got it set up so that you can install packages temporarily like that so that your live session can be more useful. And they switched to the new VT console by default, so you can get high-resolution text console and stuff.
So yeah, definitely very slick. I know I've talked to the guys over there. I think they're using the PC sysinstall backend for the installer there, which is why they have Grub support, which is pretty cool. So you'll have to go check that out. That's at ghostbsd.org. And thank you, Sean, for sending this in. We appreciate you bringing this to our attention. Okay, next up we have a blog post about moving to FreeBSD, and this is actually a quite in-depth blog post. But Randy Westland takes us through his journey of moving over from Gen 2 to FreeBSD. And he just mentions briefly he was inspired in part due to Systemd and some of the fallout there, but he said he kind of got his start just spending some time reading on Wikipedia about BSD, and then that piqued his interest. And then he took the plunge, grabbed FreeBSD, and gave it a whirl in a VM. Now, the article is quite long and very well written, so I encourage you to go read it, especially if you have, some BSD curious friends or people who want to find out a little bit more about it. This is just a great way to hear about his experiences. But a couple pull quotes from the article here. First one, he says, "My first impression was that installation was super easy. Installing Gen 2 is done manually and can be a fun weekend adventure if you're not sure what you're doing. I can spin up a new FreeBSD VM in 5 minutes."
Also, on the FreeBSD download page, you can actually download pre-built VMs as well.
Right, so you could have done that even faster. But we'll forgive him for that because he's writing an article
the
about
installer is actually pretty good now. Not as good as PCBSDs, but we're working on that.
Well, different thing. We'll get there. We'll get there. But another pull quote, and I like this one here. He says, "There's a man page for everything, and they're well written." He says, "Gen 2 has the best documentation of any Linux distro I've used, but FreeBSD is on a whole other level. With a copy of the FreeBSD handbook and the system man pages, I can actually get things done without tabbing over to Google every 5 minutes." So
there's a whole team of people that do a lot of work on that.
Yeah, when you come to these conferences like VBSD or BSDCan, a lot of times there are doc sprints or different doc events that happen.
If you've never looked at actually helping with the docs before, the doc sprints are there to kind of pair you up one-on-one with a doc person and help you get your first patch written and committed. And, usually we find that once you get people, show them how easy it is to get 1 or 2 commits done, then they'll keep at it. And that's how we keep growing our documentation team.
Yeah. So even if you're not like a C developer or something, there's a lot of things you can do at a BSD conference where you can actually contribute to the project and things get committed. So I know Drew did that at a VBSD Con. I don't know if you saw Alan, but she said she got some new people working on the PCBSD handbook and on some FreeNAS stuff, and it's pretty cool.
That's how I got. That's how I got started as a documenter. had interest and knew it was going to happen. So on my train ride to BSDCan 2013, I wrote a couple of a couple thousand words on in plain text while I was on the train, and then I came to the doc sprint and they started teaching me how to mark it up. And it's like, we don't say I and you and so on in the documentation, so you need to reword this a little bit. And here's how you mark up commands and show what output on the screen looks like. And that turned into the giant ZFS chapter that is now part of the handbook.
Nice. So, of course, thank you, Matt, for tipping us to this blog post, because, this is a fantastic one. And again, show it to your friends who are on Linux, who are maybe, curious about it or want to know a little bit more about BSD. This guy had a great journey here on how he migrated over, and he gave us a nice little shout out to PCBSD as well at the bottom about that's an even easier way to get started on FreeBSD. So thank you for that as well. We appreciate that. Okay, well, next up we have OpenBSD news. It looks like they have enabled GPT by default.
So it was if-deffed out before, so you had to specifically turn some knobs to actually make it compiled in because it had some issues. But they apparently have fixed all the ones they know about, and so they've turned it loose on their current snapshots and are asking people to give it a try and see how it works. Especially if you like to have quite a few partitions on your disk, or if you have a disk over 2 terabytes, then GPT becomes really the only option.
Sure. So it looks like users on current should probably go ahead and start giving this a whirl, and of course report any issues back upstream. Hopefully there aren't any, but that's cool to see it. That's available
GPT was kind of a life changer for me. Being able to just be like, well, I actually need to put 24 partitions on the disk. Oh, okay. And, I want to label the partition with what it is. And it's like, oh, okay. And how about having useful names for the partitions instead of, 37 is in some table somewhere and means this file system.
Great. So thank you, Jonah, for writing in about this one as well. We appreciate you sending that over. Now, of course, it wouldn't be a BSD Now week without a Ted Euangst article, right, up on his blog. So in this week's rant, Ted takes on the notion of reproducible builds being the end-all be-all for security. So I don't know if you had a chance to read through all this.
I love his opening line. He's like, reproducible builds are a waste of time. Sort of. Maybe. Right? It depends.
Maybe. Kind of, right? But yeah, I mean, that's a great opener to a blog post. So it's a fascinating one. It's kind of long, and he even has an update where I guess they went back and forth with some of the Debian guys a little bit. It spawned some other threads and whatnot, and he responds to some of the responses. But he brings up some really good points about reproducible builds and, what about compiler backdoors, for example? Or, that doesn't necessarily prevent shell shock because that was a bug in the code itself. So, no gain there. But it was interesting. What do you think,
I guess,
Alan? I know
first we can kind
more of an
explain
piece.
what reproducible builds are for people that don't know. Generally, when you go into the ports tree and make, install, or whatever to build the software, it will come out a certain way. But if you did it on a different computer, it might come out different. Oftentimes, it's just there are timestamps in the files, or sometimes in the version info for a program, it'll have, the name of the computer it was compiled on and the date and what version and so on. So the idea with reproducible builds is to remove that as much as you can so that, if there's a package in the package repo, if you were to build the exact same thing on your computer, it would come out exactly the same, such that you could verify that what was in the ports tree is actually what was coming to you out of the package system. Currently, we just have, these are signed by the FreeBSD package team, so I trust them, but actually being able to say, I read through the source code, there's nothing wrong with the source code, I compiled the source code, and it came out exactly the same as that package, is much more useful. And it also, is something that FreeBSD has been trying to do just so that security updates are easier, because currently there's quite a bit of hoop jumping that's done in FreeBSD update to deal with the fact that, hey, if we just compile all of FreeBSD release again, it's actually going to be quite a bit different. We're going to patch all these files when all we're doing is changing the date and time it was compiled, or or the username it was compiled with.
Yeah, I think it's a great idea to have the feature. Again, it's not the be-all, end-all for security, but the idea, for example, I get a security patch, and then I go I build everything, checksum, go, wait a minute, if this checksum over here doesn't match it, this isn't right. Like maybe that touched something else I didn't intend to, or whatever. Like it just opens up more possibilities. Whereas now I do a build world and every checksum changes, and I don't know which ones were because of the actual source commit change that went in, or what it is, which ones are just timestamps, for example.
The blog post mentions an article over at motherboard.com talking about Debian's plan to get reproducible builds, and goes on to talk about how this will thwart the CIA and the NSA from injecting backdoors into your programs and so on. And that's true if they compromise the compiler of one of the Debian cluster builders or something like that. But it doesn't help if they get everybody's compiler, because then it will reproducibly have the backdoor in it.
That's right.
But, and eventually it's like, how do you decide what to trust and trusting trust and so on? It goes all the way back up. There was a classic example from, I think, even as far back as the 80s or something. Somebody wrote a compiler that would inject the backdoor into the login daemon, like the login part of the Unix. But then the compiler would compile the compiler with the code to make it inject the backdoor, but then would remove it from itself when it was done. And so then when you look at the compiler, it's fine, but the compiler you just compiled now has the code to inject the flaw into login and to infect the new compiler when you compile the compiler with the new compiler.
Oh, man.
Yeah. And so, it comes down to that. This kind of thing is that it's, another arrow in the arsenal, but it doesn't necessarily solve all the problems.
So like a lot of these security technologies, there's no one size fits all where it's everything. It's like these are all just tools. And with the tools, you build up the structures which give you good security.
But yeah.
So yeah, that's it's interesting article. So thank you, Ted, for writing that. I know we always look forward to your posts. Okay, it's time to get into the feedback and questions for this week. But of course, before we do that, we're going to go ahead and mention our other sponsor this week, which is going to be TarSnap. And you've heard us talk about this a lot. And come on, guys. I mean, you don't have to go to the conference and meet Colin in person and find out he's a trustworthy guy. No, you don't need to do that. You don't need to know what's happening on the remote side, because TarSnap makes that irrelevant. Everything's encrypted before it leaves your box, which is the way all backups should be. And of course, tarsnap.com/BSD Now is where you can go to download a client right now. And of course, if you're paranoid enough, which some of us probably are, you don't even have to download a binary. Don't trust random binaries that you got off of websites. You can go compile it from source yourself. How many backup software solutions offer that? So,
exactly.
Very trustworthy. So anyway, you guys know it. You need to go to TarSnap, get signed up right now. Anything you want to add on that?
It only takes $5, and that $5 will last you a surprisingly long time.
That's right. That's right. So a low commitment to get started. Let's put it that way. It's definitely easy to get you started, and you'll be doing your backups right away. A tar-like interface. So if you're already a command line junkie and you know your way around the tar command, you're going to feel right at home with TarSnap.
Yep. Plus,
okay,
if you're downloading the code anyway to compile it, take a look at that bug bounty they got there. $2,000 for building an exploit on that bug.
That's right. So consider that a research project, if you can find one. People have been looking for a while.
Well, this is the one where they found the bug and they fixed it.
Yeah,
but if you can write an exploit that exploits the bug, they will pay you for it. Even though they've already fixed the bug. Right. He just wants to know, how would you do this?
That's right. So is it even exploitable? Yes. So definitely go check that out. If you're somebody who likes living in that area, you can take a look, maybe earn some free money there. That's pretty cool. Okay, well, first up this week, we have David Bixler writes in, and he's talking about a lockup. He said, "Hey guys, I'm a relative newbie with FreeBSD and enjoying the experience. However, lately I've been managing blah, blah, blah. How do I say that? Lately, I have been managing to fubble finger the keyboard while editing the files. Gosh, I'm a little dyslexic today. While editing files with Easy Editor and causing the terminal to lock up. This is happening on both of my 10.2 servers. I can Alt F2 to a new terminal and reboot, but was wondering if you can suggest any magic workarounds to unlock the first terminal. Nothing I have tried seems to work."
Right.
I think you guys talked about
this.
This
so I emailed back and forth, and we managed to figure out what it was. And, of course, it's a feature, not a bug.
That's right.
So he was pressing scroll lock, and on FreeBSD at a terminal, what that does is actually allow you to scroll back up into the buffer, which is a feature other operating systems don't have. But when you do press scroll lock, it stops taking regular input and just looks for the arrow keys to let you scroll up and down and read the back buffer. And if you press scroll lock again, it goes back to normal. Although in an interactive program, this is, especially confusing. So he managed to figure out what it was, and he's jammed some cardboard under his scroll lock key so he can't press it by accident.
Well, that's one way to do it.
Of course.
Although he knows
now that he knows what it is, exactly,
it's
it's easy enough to hit scroll lock again. But I kind of, as a longtime user, you sometimes forget that people don't know about that feature, and I don't know. Like, even if we covered it in documentation, what section would it be in where you would just accidentally discover it, right?
Yeah. And I don't know where his scroll lock is on his keyboard, but I've never accidentally.
Well, I think it's a laptop keyboard, and sometimes they're in weird places, like near the number pads or something.
That would make sense. That would make sense. Okay. Well, good to know, but that is how you get back out of it. So maybe somebody else out there is like, man, for years I've been rebooting because I couldn't figure out how to close the session.
Right, because I had him...
there you go.
I tried having him kill EE to see what happened, and it would exit EE, but the terminals to be jammed. I was like, weird.
Yep. That's hilarious. Well, cool. We're glad we're able to figure that out.
I don't remember how I learned about it. Somebody in the chat room says they learned about it by reading Absolute BSD. But how did I ever find out about that? I have no idea.
I've never had to use, or I've never had a reason why I needed to use it at the console. I'm always SSH'd in.
Right.
So I've never, it's not something in my repertoire of things I use because I'm very rarely.
Well, I am fairly rarely, but sometimes I do at the console, and you forget to pipe something through less or something. And you just want to scroll up a couple lines, and it's like, or some program spits out a big long error, and it's like, I need to read the top half of that error.
That's true. That is true.
Anyway.
Okay. Well, hopefully you guys learned something new if you haven't tried that before. Now you got a new key to play with. So. Okay, well, next up we have Poffenberger writes in, who he's been following the show.
He was actually the guy in the chat room mentioning how he learned about scroll lock.
That's right. So he says, greetings, Sean. I've listened to the interview related to this topic at BSD Now, and he lists the link to the episode where Sean Bruno was providing some tips about getting him set up with his ARM building of packages. He said, Sean provided some valuable tips that helped me get far along as I have with the project. I'm so close to having this work, I thought I'd drop you guys a message to see if you can help me out. He said, I need to build a small handful of ports so I can have MIPS 64 packages for my Edge router Lite. He said, including dependencies, ProDriver says it's about 27 in total to be built. Oh, that's not bad.
Yeah, he says every time he goes to do it, he runs package, and it just it fails to build package, which is the first thing ProDriver builds before it can build the other stuff. And he talks a little bit about the troubles he's having with it, and includes all the steps he did to get up to running ProDriver to try to figure out what the problem is. Partly, I would suggest maybe trying FreeBSD current instead of 10 stable, because I know the MIPS code there should be more mature. The other thing is he lists some of the stuff about running that image activation stuff, and I think most of that is actually built into ProDriver now. We covered an article on that last week by Brad Davis, where for the ARM stuff, you just tell ProDriver that you're building for ARM v6, and it does all the magic for you. So that might eliminate some of the trouble that he's having.
Sure.
But we linked the details here, and if anybody actually does know how to help him get through the MIPS 64 bits of this, and he's got links with his error messages and so on. Or actually, that was the reply I sent to him. He wasn't sure why package was failing to build, and I showed him how to get to the log files, because ProDriver actually logs the entire, like the configure output and everything of the entire build process, and hopefully he can figure out what's going on. And he mentions on IRC that he sent an email to Sean Bruno directly. So Sean probably back home now. He was at VBSDCon, so he probably wasn't answering that much email, but you can expect an email fairly soon.
Okay. And he did say Poffenberger's on IRC right now. He said, I included that to the show the first time I tried. He said, I did it that way with image activators after your latest show, and he said, I tried it the other ways as well. So we'll see. Maybe Sean will have some tips on what to do with this. Maybe this is something he's tried or hasn't tried. I don't recall him mentioning
I was pretty sure that most of the work he's been doing has been MIPS 32, not 64. I don't know how far along the 64 stuff is.
Okay. Well, maybe we'll get an answer here shortly for you, Poffenberger, so stay tuned. And, of course, if you hear from Sean ahead of time or he doesn't CC us, let us know so we know what the answer is, and we will pass it along. Okay, well, next up, we have some mailing list gold here. So you want to explain what's going on here, Alan?
Yeah, so this is a thread over on OpenBSD MISC where they were talking about some problems booting a Socris 4501, and it's going back and forth, and then someone chimed in with some kind of irrelevant info saying that their Socris 5501, which is a different model, is working fine. But that's actually like quite different hardware and so on. And so somebody replied back and says, also, my lunch was okay, since we're talking about completely different things.
That's right.
Very good. You can kind of see both ways. It's like, the person's trying to be helpful, but at the same time, it's completely irrelevant.
All right. I can't get this working on ARM, but don't worry, on PowerPC, it's okay.
Yep.
That's great.
Yep.
Oh, very cool. Very cool. Okay, well, we have a couple things for you today as we close out the show. So first up, of course, as we mention every week, send everything in to feedback@bsdnow.tv. That's what we monitor for stories, or if you have comments or questions or tech questions or anything you want to have us talk about on the show, or even offline, we'll talk about
Big thanks to the people that did that this week. It helped a lot.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because me and Alan, I just got back last night. When did you get in?
Monday, late, yeah. I slept until about an hour and 10 minutes before the show today. So I was scrambling to have breakfast and finish the show notes.
That's right. That's right. So, yeah, it's been a busy couple days, and then Alan's getting ready to head out to Europe,
yes,
I guess. When do you leave for that?
I leave next Wednesday. I'll be boarding my plane to Sweden and going to an ACM conference, and then hanging out in Sweden for a little bit, and then going directly to EuroBSDCon. And then coming home and spending a few days at home, and then heading to the OpenZFS Developer Summit. And then coming home for 9 or 10 days, and then going to the Silicon Valley Dev Summit.
Man, very, very busy. Yep. Well, that is crazy. So you got me beat. I'm only going up to Ohio for Ohio Linux Fest and back. So short trip for me, luckily. Same time zone and everything. So I like that. But the point is, we tend to get busy. So if you guys find some stories or something, you're like, oh, I wonder if the guys have seen this, especially when we're out of town. Maybe we haven't, because a lot of times, I know for me, we're at hotels a lot of times. The Wi-Fi doesn't work very well, and we're busy doing other stuff. So email doesn't necessarily get checked, or feeds don't get read and whatnot. So try and send us stuff to feedback@bsdnow.tv just to make sure we don't miss anything that you think is important.
Yeah, like the reason I'm so tired is that on Sunday night after the conference was over, I stayed up until 5 a.m. talking with other BSD people like Sean Bruno and Glenn Barber and a bunch of other people. And yeah, so I slept for like 3.5 hours, and then got up and had to shower and get dressed and get on an airplane, catch the shuttle to the airport and get on an airplane, fly home, and then so I decided this time, instead of having scheduling a car service to pick me up at the airport and drive me home, I would take they built a new train that goes the Union Pearson Express that goes express from the airport to the train and bus station, like the big one, and normally it's hour-long-ish bus ride home from there. But one bus crashed into another bus and closed the entire bus terminal, and every single bus was canceled. So then it was take a train part of the way home and then switch to a bus, and it ended up taking 3 hours to get home. And I was already really tired.
Yeah, you were done before
if I had just spent... It's roughly twice as much as the series of trains and so on costs. Then I would have been home after 45 minutes.
Ouch. Well,
yeah.
Are you going to try it again when you come back?
Hell no. I already booked the car service.
Oh, man. Well, anyway, needless to say, Alan needs some more sleep and rest before he has to head to Euro. So, we'll wrap this up. But one thing we do want to mention also, we are actually looking for a new producer to help keep the show running smoothly and do some of the behind-the-scenes work that happens during the week when Alan and I are out of town and whatnot. So if you're interested, we have a link on the website to a form you can fill out. It's just a bit.ly/BSD producer. So that's probably short enough. You can just type that in. And if you're interested, fill that out. Get in touch with us, and we will let you guys know. We will be in touch.
Yeah, and we look forward to hearing from some people and getting their help putting the show together. Mostly it's just a matter of, trawling through the internet and finding interesting things and browsing through the commit history and looking for the best stuff and making sure that it gets into the show, and we can hook you up to help sort through the email we get as well to make sure that we can, collate the stuff that people send in for us and help us sort out the questions and so on. It's really not all that much work, but it would be very, very helpful.
Yeah, for sure, especially on weeks like this week
Yes,
in particular.
Or just
I didn't get in until late last night, and I woke up sorry. I'm like, oh crap, we got show notes.
Right. Yeah. When I woke up at 12:45, and I was like, I have to go live at 2:00, and what?
Yep. Yeah. So anyway, if that's something you are interested in or have some spare time, would like to help with, again, get in touch with us, fill out the form. We'd love to hear from you, and we will see if we can make something come of that.
Yes, and so for the next 2 weeks, we have pre-recorded episodes we've already finished for you, and so you won't miss any BSD Now while we're gone. But we'll be back on October 7th. Yes. With a great interview with Adrian Chad about the new FCC proposed regulations that will cause us all much heartache. So
this is a big deal, guys. This is a big deal. Like, this is like Chris moving out of the country. Big deal if this kind of stuff happens. So anyway,
so
let's just
stay tuned for that
craziness. Anyway, sorry, that's like an epic tease because they got to wait like 3 weeks now to hear that. But anyway, you'll enjoy it. So definitely stay tuned to BSD Now. There's lots of good, exciting stuff coming your way, and we'll look forward to speaking to you again next time.